I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Neame, Chief Executive of Shepherd Neame, Britain's oldest family-run brewer based in Faversham, Kent. Jonathan runs a vertically integrated business with a brewery and pub estate of both managed and tenanted pubs across the southeast and England. I'm sure no one will need reminding that the hospitality sector has been through a difficult and challenging years due to COVID-19. As we enter the new normal in 2022, operators were faced with a fresh wave of challenges. From an operational perspective, we saw record high inflation levels, staffing shortages, interest rate rises, and changing consumer behaviour and talk of a prolonged recessionary conditions. From a transactional perspective, however, we saw the lack of stock leading to resilient pricing and strong interest from buyers. Nonetheless, the pub sector has been remarkably resilient. Lenders have generally been patient, and the wave of distress, which many predictors, has failed to materialise.
Thank you for asking me on, Stephen. And it has been an interesting time, to say the least. But personally, and from our company perspective, I remain very optimistic about the prospects of the pub sector, albeit that we're going to have, some sticky water in the near term. But I think the thing that sort of gave me the greatest hope of anything the last 3 years was when, after lockdown 1, pubs did reopen, we were allowed back out, and you could see immediately that there was demand to go back to people's local pub and to drinking in communities again. And I think from that moment on, the greatest fear that the new normal would be fundamentally different in the new world, to my mind, has evaporated. And I would say that all the normal trends, notwithstanding the economic background, all the normal trends exist at the moment. That if you offer good value for money, if you've got a great licensee, if the food offer's great, if the beer's fantastic, consumers have been coming out and have been spending. The pub gardens were full in summer. We were lucky with the weather and so on and so forth. I also am very conscious of a comment that somebody made to me early on in lockdown 1, that they said that the new normal, in their view, would be remarkably similar to the old normal. And I think that is progressively becoming the case. All those fears about going back to the office, whilst there is still a hybrid element in society, I think the back to office momentum has accelerated through the autumn, certainly in London. And I think the normal patterns of trading more at the weekends, big nights on Thursday, etc., 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 seem to have re-established themselves. Sunday lunch, family time, all these normal patterns have become more and more predictable, and therefore we've just analysed Christmas, for example, and noticed that the trading patterns per day in the run-up to Christmas and between Christmas and New Year are almost identical to 2018. So that's quite interesting. So I think that from the demand side, I'm actually pretty comfortable with where we are. The demand for the British pub is still good. But having said that, there has been remarkably little business failure in the last couple of years, and I fear that we will see an acceleration of that because businesses have been propped up. The market may be smaller in volume terms, and I think we may see a contraction in the market going forward. But I suspect the demand for good outlets, the best outlets, will be as strong as ever.
The question we were always being asked throughout the pandemic was, what's the pub sector going to look like as we came out of it? And I think that there was a sort of view or an expectation that the market might fundamentally shift, that people would get used to working from home, that a lot of the existing social norms would change. And I think I've observed exactly what you've said. I mean, I'm in our London office today, and it seems to be more or less back to capacity again. And apart from train strikes and other issues, I think there's a desire for people to get back to, as you say, life as it was pre-pandemic. I guess the only difference is that certain people have changed their behaviours, but fundamentally, the British pub is ingrained in society, isn't it? And I think what it has shown over the last 2 years is people's affinity with the sector. I was just wondering from your perspective, particularly when we're looking at some of the cost challenges, how that's impacted on your business. And I know you sort of operate a vertically integrated business, which I guess probably has more challenges than most, with having the brewing side, a tenanted pub estate, and a managed estate. And given cost inflation, raw material prices, and the like, I'm just wondering what you've put in place to try and counteract some of those issues, and how long you probably think some of these cost pressures are likely to be around.
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. I think whilst the demand side has been reasonably resilient so far, and it may tail off into the spring as these pressures pass on to the consumer, it's the cost side that's been far more challenging. And I think I would probably break it down into three stages. I think if you go back to when lockdown was lifted, you had one surge of inflation then, which was all to do with the supply chain, of simply not being able to get stuff, and all containers around the world based in China and all this stuff. So there was a step up in cost then. There was a second step up in cost based upon the removal of government support in the spring of 2022. And then, of course, there's the impact of the energy crisis in the Ukraine war. That has led to a blizzard of increase in costs in our input costs. A lot of talk about food, obviously direct energy, glass, logistics, you could go on and on. I'd say that the rate of that cost impact is slowing down. And I'm optimistic that we are past peak inflation. And once you get to that point, you can start sort of managing your cost base with a greater degree of certainty and not constantly firefighting the whole time. I think it is fair to say that our current issues are much more focused on the brewery and its supply chain, CO2, glass, logistics, than on the pubs, albeit the cost inflation there has also been significant. If I'm right, and if the velocity of these increases is reducing, then I remain optimistic that by the time we get to mid-23, or certainly the back end, there will still be wage inflation coming through that, which may be above the rate of product inflation. But I'm pretty optimistic by the time we get to the end of this year, the picture will look quite a bit rosier. And to a certain extent, all of this is a normal process to get back to a kind of normal parameters of 2 to 4% inflation, 2 to 4% wage increases, and 2 to 4% interest rates. And what's been abnormal has been the last decade. And people forget that because they're, struggling in this transition period. But I think that's where we're going to end up.
You're quite right. We've sort of got used to very low levels of inflation. And I guess it's the proportionate increase, isn't it, which is the important thing. Where you go from 1 to 2%, it's 100% increase. It's that sort of step up which has been the issue. And I think alongside that, some of the staffing issues we've had as well. I think what has amazed me is the ability of the sector to find innovative ways around some of these issues, whether it's by looking at sort of technology, ordering systems, whether it's looking at how menus are put together. I think the sector has just proved that it can adapt to these situations. And I think equally, if you look at some of the labour issues, how you can have less labour intensive operations as well. We co-authored the UKH benchmarking survey, and that was showing significant cost increases pre-COVID. And I think those are set to increase. And I just wondering whether the move to premiumization was as part of a necessity, or whether it was part of reaction to consumer demand, or a mixture of both. But there doesn't seem to be a lack of demand for premium products. And I just wonder whether you're sort of finding that across your estate, and equally with your portfolio as brands as well.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that the middle ground of an average pub, an average environment, average service, and average food is not tenable. I mean, I'm sure there will always be a place for value offers if you get the volume to meet your cost base. But the cost base of every pub has gone up. And the natural response to all of those is to increase the quality of the experience, make sure the service is better, make sure the food's better, make sure the environment is better. And of course, that's not possible for some pubs. So I think there will be a contraction in the number of outlets. But those that survive, if they can become the dominant pub in their community, probably the size of the community needed to make them dominant has got bigger. But if you've got one pub in a community with 10,000 people and it's an outstanding offer, you can still make a lot of money and it can still be a fantastic business. And I think that's really what's going to happen up and down the country. Those few communities that have still got, 2 or 3 pubs all cheek by jowl competing with each other, I just don't see that as being a viable future. You should end up with one or 2 very differentiated offers.
Yeah, I've certainly noticed in my local market that there's been a reconnection with that local community offer as well. With people working from home, they've sort of appreciated having those kind of facilities on their doorstep. And in the past, it's a bit like, I suppose, using the village pub, isn't it? People never used the village pub when it was, pre-pandemic times, but they suddenly realised what they've missed. And I think that reconnection with the community is quite encouraging as well. On sort of workforce issues, and just touching upon that, seems to have been probably as much as an issue for the sector as alongside costs. How have you found that across the various component parts of your business on the brewing side and running pubs, and how you've sort of pivoted to deal with some of those issues about staffing issues?
Well, I think as a business, we are lucky in that we've been around a long time and that we've got a good profile within the community. I think we were seen to do the right thing for our licensees in particular during COVID. And so, touch wood, our reputation as an employer is pretty good. So our retention rates have been strong, certainly in the brewery. We've been recruiting quite heavily at the head office. And out in the pubs, I don't think our experience has been quite as difficult as some people, particularly in those in city centres. Notwithstanding that, we are not complacent. We've moved, adjusted sort of our pay and benefits structure and strategy, certainly in the pubs. We're investing far more in trying to create career paths for people entering the trade. We've just hired a head of apprenticeships. We've taken on a number of people to really develop our training, because I think this day and age, it's not all about pay. Obviously, that's very important to be competitive. It's as much about the experience you can get. You can have, as an employee, the career path, the opportunities for training. Well, our response is to try and really build up on that side. And touch wood, so far, we are doing okay. But I'd say product inflation on the brewery is a greater challenge for us at this moment in time.
There's loads of really good stories out there from people progressing from, sort of pot washer up to chief executive. And I think it's probably one of the few sectors where genuinely you can, move from the shop floor to the top job. And I'm just wondering how as a sector, Jonathan, we try promote hospitality and pubs and brewing as a career for people, particularly younger people who've probably seen the sector go into lockdown or trade with restrictions over a couple of years. How we sort of encourage people to come into it as a career opportunity.
I don't think we are alone in the UK in this respect. I think if you look across the world, people have re-evaluated where they wish to work, and clearly some of the online companies provide a degree of flexibility that has been attractive for people. But equally, those companies are not having an easy life of it, and everybody is kind of fighting for staff. I think, relatively speaking, in the retail space, hospitality is actually quite strong. If you compare it to careers in straightforward retailing, the great places to work used to be in the grocery trade or clothing or Marks and Spencer's or places like that, and hospitality was less attractive then. You all know a great waiter, a great front of house person, what great service is. And for those people that believe in that face-to-face experience, hospitality still offers the most authentic experience, both for the customer and for the member of staff. People are still coming into the sector. There's negativity, but I think it's more about perception and reality. People are still coming into the sector because they don't necessarily want to have a technical driven job or a home-based job. They want to speak to real people on a daily basis and learn about their lives and look after them.
Just moving on to sort of customer behaviour and sustainability, environmental matters, which seems to be one of the buzzwords at the moment. Yeah, I read with interest some of the initiatives you're taking on ESG matters in your accounts. I just wondered if you could maybe talk us through some of the initiatives and how you're sort of addressing some of the ESG issues as a company.
I'd like to think the company like ourselves has been doing ESG for many, many years, because we're a community business committed to the community. And if you intend to be around for a long time, you need to keep investing back into the community rather than just taking it for granted. What's clearly of high profile at the moment is energy and how we can make buildings much more sustainable. We've got a whole series of initiatives looking at where the energy consumption is within individual pubs. 200 of our 300 pubs are listed buildings, so that's a challenge in its own right. But I think that the immediate observation I would have is how profligate we are as a society with our use of energy, and how poorly we've thought through a lot of things over the last 10, 20 years. You know, you've got so many kitchens where you've got massive heat dumps because of the gas coming out of the stoves, offset by air conditioning to try and take that heat out. You've got cellars where you've got heat dumps coming out of the refrigeration, and so on and so forth, all conflicting with each other and therefore creating a lot of energy that is wasted. And I think the first thing that we need to do is to work out where all these conflicts are, which devices and white goods, etc., are using the most energy, and then introduce mechanisms to reduce that. But it still amazes me how many pubs you drive past and lights are blazing all night, and streets are blazing with lights the whole time. You know, you can behave differently. People can change their behaviour. And I think that's a key part of what we need to do. And people that are paying for these things directly, independent licensees, I do notice are changing their behaviour, and I think that's actually quite good. The other area is obviously waste, packaging waste. There's lots of change of legislation here. I think a lot of the things on the horizon to do with small packaging going into Scotland, in particular, the DRS scheme, packaging waste rate changing regime in England that's coming forward. These are all horrifically high costs, which has either got to be passed to the consumer, or there's got to be a big shift in the type of packaging that we use. And I think the other sort of trend I would notice, and I think it's very relevant to us in Kent, Garden of England, lots of great producers, is that people not only want great food these days, they want affordable food, but they want local food more and more. One of the great challenges with the food supply chain has been getting local food into pubs and into the supply chain in an affordable way, in the right sort of package and so on. But that's changing. We've got a big drive to try and get many more local dishes and local suppliers onto our menus. And all of that, I think, helps bind you more and more to the local community.
You know, my daughter will not go to a pub if they have plastic straws and whatever. So, the consumer is definitely voting with their feet, aren't they, on occasion?
And I think that trend, that consumer-driven behaviour trend, will drive behaviour change from licensees and producers like ourselves. Otherwise, we will cease to be relevant.
Just moving on to your sentiment for the year ahead. Well, where do you think, fast forwarding 12 months' time, you'll be as a business, and where are the opportunities going to lie for you, both on the brewing side and the pub ownership side? Where are you sort of seeing the opportunities as we sort of emerge from hopefully the post-COVID environment?
From our own point of view, we've got an awful lot of opportunities, because the way we got through COVID was to starve the business of investment, essentially. Other businesses raised equity or changed their capital structure. In our case, we've got very good long-term debt arrangements. We've got cheap debt relative to where we are now, 20-year money at 3.99%, which is a very good platform from which to pick up our capital investment in our pubs. That drive will be in our retail pubs. We've got quite a lot of opportunity there. I think it'll continue to be tough in brewing throughout this year. But essentially what we're trying to do is to get more scale in our retail business. We're just under 70 pubs. I think we can see a route through to 100 over the next few years. And that's our principal focus. That means we need better marketing, better digital infrastructure, better training and people support, as I touched on earlier. I think the year is going to be a difficult one from a profit point of view. I'm more optimistic than most in terms of trading levels. I think that we will start to see a return of consumer optimism from the summer onwards. And as I said earlier, I think by the back end of the year, we will be not in a sort of golden sweet spot, but I think we will be in a much more normal world. And hopefully some of the fears about Ukraine, about energy, about cost of living crisis will be past their peak. And we can start to look forward as an economy to a bit more growth.
Finally, if there's one thing the government could do to help the sector, what would you like to ask for?
Well, I'm optimistic about the alcohol duty reform, which is coming forward, still coming forward in August next year, which will create this differentiation between large pack and small pack and revise the small brewers relief. So I think hopefully that will get through and get onto the statute book. I think the obvious one is still rates. There is still a disproportionate burden carried on the sector. It is encouraging what the government has done in terms of the 75% relief, extending it. Some of the recent evaluations coming out for the new list 2023 is quite encouraging, but there are still plenty of anomalies. And I think relative to other parts of the economy, the pub sector still has too much to bear.
Finally, John, could just thank you very much for your time today and for your insightful comments on the sector. It's been really interesting and fascinating. The pub, and brewing are ingrained into British society. And I'm sure the sector will come out of this stronger than it ever has before. And hopefully from Shepherd Neame's point of view, let's look forward to the next 400 years.
I hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, anyway.